to the right, 242. The noes to the left, 391. So the noes have it, the noes have it.
This is an issue of grave importance for the future of our country. Just like the referendum, there are strongly held and equally legitimate views on both sides.
It's fair to say it's all a bit chaotic right now with Brexit, but this week on the Property Podcast, we're going to help everyone see sense.
Yes, welcome to the Property Podcast, where every week property investors come together to be informed and inspired. We normally record our episodes at least a few days in advance, but today we're recording it the day before it airs because everything's changing on a day-by-day, even hour-by-hour basis. Today, we're going to cut through all of that and take you back to the big picture. We're going to explain what's going on, how we feel about it, and what you should be doing.
Now, as Rob has said, this is a very special episode. And normally now we do the news story, but the whole episode is the news story because there's so much happening. Now, luckily, the BBC have put together a fantastic article, which is titled Brexit, What Happens Now? And it looks at all the scenarios that could play out. So, we thought it'd be useful, before we get really specific about property and what's going to happen there, is talk about Brexit more in general and look at the scenarios that could play out, whether they're likely or unlikely. So the BBC, Rob, thinks there's 7 ways this could go. Just 7.
Just the 7, yeah. So we're recording this episode on the morning of Wednesday, the 13th of March. So yesterday for us, 2 days ago for you, if you are listening promptly to this episode, there was another vote on Theresa May's deal, which failed. Today, on the day that we're recording this, yesterday for you, there's a vote on whether we should go for no deal at all. And Rob, fair to say that's likely to fail?
Yeah, it's fair to say it's going to fail. Now, we could look very silly, and it'll be a double silly for me because at the start of the year I predicted there'd be no deal. So let's wait and see. There could be many of you laughing at us right now, but we are very confident that that's not going to happen. And we're also very confident that the government's going to vote to extend the Brexit process. Now, the EU will have to approve that, but we believe our government, at the very least, is going to vote for that. So, if those two things happen, they reject a no deal, and they vote for an extension, what are the 7 scenarios?
Okay, so first option, no deal eventually. So we have an extension, still can't work anything out, so end up leaving without a deal. How likely do you reckon that one is, Rob?
I reckon actually this has got a chance. Although we've said there's not going to be a no deal now, it's possible that we get there in the future. I don't think likely, but I think the odds increase as time goes by because people may just get fed up of the whole process. I don't think this will play out though. Out of all the 7 scenarios, I think number 2 has the most chance of happening, which is another vote on Theresa May's deal. Now, you may be thinking, well, wait there, she's had 2 cracks at this. Why would it go through a third time? If we have an extension and everyone comes to the realisation that this is the best, worst option we've got, I know, pretty grim, hey? Then people may be resigned to taking that deal. And there's already been talk that people who've said no for the first 2 times would take this deal if they thought Brexit was in jeopardy. So a third crack of the whip, it may get through. If you think about the voting, the first time Theresa May lost by over 200 votes, the second time she lost by roughly 150 votes, that number's going down. She has a chance of getting this through at a third attempt if everyone realises that the other options just aren't worth thinking about.
So the third option is that rather than Theresa May's deal, we throw that out and have a complete renegotiation. So rather than just trying to tweak from where we are, start all over again. That option, I would say, is very unlikely. For a start, it would involve Parliament actually deciding on what it wants in the first place, so it knows what it's trying to negotiate for. And it would also involve the EU actually wanting to have a renegotiation, and it's hard to see why they would want to entertain that. So I'd say that's probably one of the less likely ones.
Yeah, I'd agree. Number 4, another referendum. Although some people would really want this, and some people really wouldn't, I'd say it's less likely as well. 3 and 4 aren't impossible, but they are less likely. Because the time that it would take to put another referendum together, plus the appetite within Parliament, means that this one probably isn't going to take place. And if it does, would just extend the uncertainty for longer.
I'd say this one depends on the length of the extension. So if it's an extension of a few months, very unlikely. But if the EU comes back and says, well, let's give it another year or another couple of years to make sure we've really got time to figure all this stuff out, then I think it's looking a lot more likely, because by that point, so much time has gone by that there's more of an argument for going back and asking the question again. But on the assumption that it is going to be a short extension, as it's meant to be, then probably not going to happen. Now, another thing that could happen, Rob, the fifth option is that Theresa May calls a general election. She'd have to be pretty brave to do that at the moment.
She would, and that's why it probably isn't going to happen, because the Conservative Party is barely a party. They aren't together, and therefore what is their manifesto? What do the Conservatives stand for? And because they can't even decide within their own party what they stand for, because they're so divided, I don't think they then have the confidence to propose a general election. Things would really have to fall apart for this scenario to play out. It's in Labour's interests, it's not in Conservatives, and therefore it probably won't happen. Another scenario, number 6, which I think we can quickly dismiss, is another vote of no confidence. We've already had one, which means that there's another 12 months before another one can take place. The chances of this one happening are really slim, and if it does happen, it'll probably be the same result as last time anyway, because the one thing the Conservatives can agree on is that they want to be in power over Labour.
And that takes us to option number 7. Just call the whole thing off. No Brexit at all. That is an option. If Parliament so wishes, it could unilaterally cancel Article 50, and it could just say, you know what, we're not going to do it. There's nothing to stop them from doing that. Nothing, that is, except for the anger of roughly half the population. It would be a really unpopular move to just cancel the whole thing. So if that is the way that things end up going, it's going to happen gradually and it's going to happen over a long period of time. It's not going to happen over the next couple of months.
So out of all the 7 scenarios, this is not a prediction, just what looks most likely at this point. We will probably vote on Theresa May's deal again, is the most likely outcome. However, a no deal at a later date or another referendum can't be ruled out completely. But the politicians, when under some time pressure, will probably come together and just accept a deal. But we will see. So Rob, that's where we are at with Brexit. Brexit affects our economy, and a huge part of the UK's economy is the housing market, which means that it's fair to say it's mixed things up a little bit.
Yeah, so before we get into what happens next, let's have a quick look at what's happening right now. And the links to all these news stories will be in the show notes. The first one we know already, widely reported. The UK property market is at its weakest since 2012, says RICS. Surveyors from RICS reporting that sellers and buyers are sitting tight because of political uncertainty. The number of people looking for a new home have fell, and house prices are falling in parts of the UK like London, the South East and East Anglia. What's the effect of that? Well, stagnating house prices, according to Nationwide. They found that property prices almost stagnated in 2018. They rose by the smallest amount in almost 6 years. Worth noting that the Nationwide index is biased towards the south, generally speaking, whereas the Halifax is biased towards the north. So it's possible that things are actually a little bit better than Nationwide were saying that they were, but still not great. And they put this down to uncertainty over the economic outlook, undermining confidence in the market. So that's what happened last year, and the consensus was that it was going to continue.
Yep, because the BBC are reporting a story that says Brexit gloom to hit housing market in 2019. And their information comes from RICS, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. And RICS predicts that the number of homes being sold and their prices will fall over the next 3 months. Short period, but still not great news because of all the uncertainty that Brexit is providing us right now.
So the word there is uncertainty. Nobody knows what's going on economically or politically, therefore they're doing nothing. And indeed, another study found that transactions dropped by a third between November and January this year. And that's dropping by a third, bear in mind, from an already very low level. Why is everyone sitting tight? Well, apart from the general uncertainty, Rob, there's been plenty of stories doing the rounds, scaring people, I think it's fair to say, about what might happen when the uncertainty finally clears and things resolve themselves.
Yes, we've seen so many news stories that have spun negativity around Brexit. And you can understand why, because it whips people up into a frenzy. And in property specifically, there's been some big stories. Last September, Mark Carney was meant to have said that property prices could fall by 35%. Now, the newspapers did report that that's what Mark Carney said would happen. Wasn't quite true. What Mark Carney did was produce a report on the absolute worst case scenarios and was reported as that's what he said is going to happen. But doesn't matter. Don't let the facts get in the way of a good news story. The property market was going to fall by 35%. And most people would have just read the headlines and not really dug into the story to see what was happening. So there's loads of negativity out there. And Rob, that then made people question on what is going to happen, understandably. And would do things like put off buying decisions.
Definitely. And you can see the logic of it. Well, if there's a possibility that in a few months' time, the whole Brexit thing will be resolved, and when that happens, there might be this huge drop in house prices, then why not just wait? And indeed, anecdotally, I've heard of a lot of buyers pulling out of purchases, both residential buyers and investment buyers, just because they've got nervous. And you can see why it happens, especially because every day there is fresh bad news and fresh uncertainty and fresh terrible things that might happen. And because the purchase process can go on for a couple of months quite easily, there's a lot of time in there for people to get nervous and think, oh, actually, am I doing the right thing? And a lot of time for people to talk to their friends, and their friends say, oh, what are you doing buying now? I read that this is going to happen. And indeed, there was something in The Guardian where someone wrote in saying, should I wait to buy because Brexit might make house prices fall? I'm trying to buy a property in Oxfordshire, but some friends say I should hold off on the deal. So with all this going on, you can see why transactions have fallen. It's not a surprise. Markets hate uncertainty. People hate uncertainty. And almost nobody has said, well, when Brexit is resolved, things will get better. Prices will go up. That hasn't really been an option. It's either going to be a catastrophic fall or a bit of a fall or things staying as they are. So you can see why people decide to either try to time the market or just try to avoid making a terrible mistake. There's really nothing to be lost by holding off if you're not in a situation where you have to move.
So, if you've not been a long time listener to the podcast, you may be feeling a bit panicked right now because, wow, all that negativity, all that uncertainty, it absolutely makes sense to hold off and just wait and see. Wrong. This is why we repeat over and over again, do not let the media be your investment guide. Because if you have been letting the media be your investment guardian, then you've been losing. So since Brexit was announced and we had the referendum in June 2016, here's the crazy thing. All those headlines, all that negativity, all that uncertainty, UK prices rise by 8%. That's right. UK prices have risen by 8% since June 2016. And if you've been listening to the podcast, Rob, you've probably done even better than that.
Yes, that 8% number comes from Home Track, and that is not a bad result, really, is it? For 2.5 years when things are meant to be terrible and no one knows what's going on and so on and so on. So if you've been sitting on the sidelines to wait to see what would happen, then you'd have missed out on that 8%. But if you've been listening to the podcast for a while and you've heard us talking about Manchester for quite a while and you decided to go and invest there, you wouldn't be up by 8%, you'd be up by 15%. Since the EU referendum in 2016, Manchester prices are up by 15%. So to put that another way, if you had not done that, if you'd been put off by the media and thought, oh, I'm just going to sit in cash for a while and wait and see what happens, you would have lost out on 15% growth that you could have had in Manchester. And just to rub things in a bit, inflation would have destroyed the value of your cash by about 5% as well. So it's absolutely not the case that there's nothing to be lost by just waiting to see. By trying to avoid a situation where you could lose, you've created a situation where you've definitely lost.
And that's the data. They're not our opinions. That's what's happened. The media gives you opinions, but what we've given you there is what's played out. Now, yes, we said these things would probably happen, and we went against the media, but we're not the only ones. There are people far wiser than us who go against the flow of traffic. Warren Buffett being one of the most famous, and his very famous quote is probably worth rolling out right now, which is, be fearful when others are greedy, and be greedy when others are fearful. And that just means that when everyone is scared or unsure, that is a time to get involved and invest. And when people are bullish and confident and think everything is flying, hold back. And that's really what we've done over the history of this podcast. When the market has been its most darkest and the uncertainty has been at its peak, that's when we've been the most bullish. Because where we are right now isn't going to last. This opportunity is only here for a while. And that absolutely links back into another one of our favourite subjects, which is the 18-year property cycle.
Ah, yes, the property cycle. If you are not familiar with the property cycle, go over to propertyhub.net/university, watch our free course there. It's so much easier to understand with the visuals. But if you are familiar with the cycle, then you'll know that what we're seeing right now, timing-wise, you'd expect to be coming into the mid-cycle dip right about now. Looking at all the evidence, that appears to be the case, at least in some areas of the country. But we all know what comes after the mid-cycle dip. What comes after the dip is the explosive phase. And yes, after that comes a crash again. It always does. It's a cycle. After the dip, you get that aggressive growth in the second half of the cycle. That might sound crazy right now. I'm not saying that we're necessarily going to have growth as aggressive as we did in the second half of the cycle last time round. Things are a bit different. But it sounds crazy even to suggest that prices are going to go up once the Brexit situation is resolved. Because the only predictions on the table seem to be different flavours of catastrophe. But actually, given that so many people have been holding back, so many people have been delaying making decisions, once that uncertainty clears, however it clears, whichever of those 7 options we get, or however many options there are beyond that, depending on how things play out, when things are resolved, everybody who's sitting around waiting to see what will happen next will know what's happening next, and they will act. And because they act, it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it seems highly likely to me, Rob, that we'll get a mini boom.
We will, because the uncertainty will be removed, and then people can crack on. And the other reason why that boom will take place is stimulus. Whatever result happens, the government is going to make sure it's a success and will stimulate the market through a variety of measures. And they'll probably overdo it to overcompensate for the uncertainty that we had. But once we have certainty plus stimulus, we have a boom, and that is what will play out next. So, in a weird way, property investors today should be thanking our Parliament for being a mess. Because what they've done is by giving us this extension, and we'll see how long it is giving us an extension of this window to get in while people are uncertain. Because when people are certain, and when stimulus hits the market's going to go. And the prices you'll pay in a year or two are going to be a lot more than you're paying today. And the deals that you can push for today are going to be nowhere near as good as the deals you're going to be able to push for in a year or two. Now, a year or two is still a great time to invest, but a better time is right now. And I know this sounds crazy, right when we're in the middle of so much uncertainty. But how often do you hear us this bullish and this passionate? It's only when things get dark, because when things get dark, we get brave. And that's what you and many of you have been doing over the last 2 years since the referendum results have been announced, and you've been rewarded. But we only can encourage you to continue to be brave, because brave can be rewarded. Brave is where big results happen. If you're timid and you do small steps, then you get small results. But if you are brave, if you go against the grain and follow the mantra of Warren Buffett, then rewards will come your way. We don't say this every week. We're not every week getting excited about what's happening in the market. It's when things like this happen. We want as many of you to benefit as possible. And that's why we're trying to drive this message home. So while the media may be getting itself into a frenzy, you should be getting yourself into a frenzy, but in a very positive way. You should be getting very focused on what you can achieve during this time period, because the data is different to what the media is telling you. The 18-year property cycle is telling you what's coming next, and all signs are pointing to that's exactly what's going to play out. So, as I said, you could see this as a pain in the bum, more uncertainty, and it's a bit frightening, or you could see it as a gift.
Yeah, thank you, Theresa May. Thank you, Jean-Claude Juncker. Thank you, ERG. Thank you, everyone involved in making this such a mess, from an investment point of view, at least. Because the longer this drags on for, the longer this buying window remains open. So that's where we stand as of today. As of next week, everything might have changed a little bit. We might know a little bit more. So we've reserved next week's episode to talk about Brexit again and to answer your questions. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about this topic on an exclusive webinar for our magazine subscribers, which we do every quarter. So they heard this first, and they had lots of really great questions about the specifics of how we think things are going to play out and what you should do. We've had lots of questions in by email and through other channels as well, but we want more. We want you to send in your questions, so next week we can answer all of them. So send them our way. You can email in, you can post on the forum, but the best thing to do is probably to send us a message on social media. You'll find us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at Property Hub UK. Send us all your Brexit related questions, and on the Property Podcast next week, we're going to be answering them all.
So we'll be back next week with another Brexit special and answering your questions. We'll in between be back with Ask Rob and Rob. So until then, take care, be brave, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.